Hi there. I'm Weston Taylor, and I'm a creative director and a game designer, both amateur and professional. I've been homebrewing since I was 13 years old. A tabletop role playing game that initially was called Spectre RPG and is now called Colonial Born. I'm making this video as much a promise to myself as a promise to you that I want to develop this game, which I have spent more than 20 years on, into something that can be shared with more than just my friends. I want to see this develop and I want to see this grow. It's been my muse for my entire adult career as an animator and as a creative director. And I think it's time, and I owe it to myself, to see this into something that can be shared with the world. If I do nothing else with my career, this would be the thing I want to bring to other people, to see other people enjoy. And so what I'm going to do over the next year is I am going to follow on this channel a developer diary that chronicles my process of trying to essentially commercialize a game from an amateur on loose leaf paper, something that's at home, into something that everybody else can enjoy. So before I can explain why you should care about this project of mine, I should explain to you why I care about it. So back when I was 13 years old, I was incredibly dissatisfied with the state of tabletop role-playing games. And so I wanted to develop something that I could share with my friends, but that I had the ability to contribute, to build a world around, and not just in setting and not just in character, but mechanically. I wanted the world to feel like the world that I created. And being that I was a huge fan of science fiction, I really didn't feel that the existing systems like D&D would be amenable to those kinds of changes. Not least because D&D was a fantasy system, but also because for me, my greatest inspirations were Marvel Comics and Star Wars and that kind of thing. And so I had this, harebrained notion of superheroes in space. And that was not the kind of gameplay that you got out of D&D or other systems of the time. And so I decided to, instead of pursuing a game style like D&D was at the time, which was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and it had THAC0, and it was onerous and difficult to play, I wanted something simple and easy to learn. And so I turned to the Marvel Superheroes Adventure game made by Sega System. For those people who don't know how that played, it was basically a 4-stat system with a deck of cards, each stat matching a suit. You would draw to hand size and you would play a card and add its value to a matching stat for whatever power or ability you wanted to use. So if you wanted to maybe shield yourself with something, then you would need to play to your strength attribute. So you would play clubs to match with strength. And then the idea was you add the stat, you add the card together, and then you have to beat whatever challenge rating is put before you. Or if you're up against an enemy, they would be doing the same thing you are, and you'd have to beat the other person's number. This was a fine system, but I made the mistake of trying to replace the cards with dice. So I broke the game. And being a 13-year-old, I didn't understand how or why I broke the game. But I did. And it became painfully clear after our first set of characters that this was not going to work. So I decided the only solution was to complexify it. So I created 2.0, which was made into the game that I would play then for about 4 years. 2.0 had its own little player's handbook, as you can see. And it was a 100 level progression system It was still based on 4 stats, and it became a melting pot for all these crazy ideas. It had rigid 2-hit systems, though they were too complicated because the best comparison I had was THAC0. So I developed that for many years until it became too weighty, too ridiculous, and too broken to be worked with. And so I came back again and said, I need to make the simplest version of a system that I can. And so I made Spectre 3.0. And Spectre 3.0 was the first time that I can actually say I was game designing. And not just throwing stuff at the wall and see what stuck. So with Spectre 3.0, what I made was a system that had a kind of what I like call an elemental system, where, rock, paper, scissors mechanic of this beats this beats this. But in each case, it was like karate beats taekwondo and taekwondo beats like Aikido. I don't remember exactly what the flow was, but each of them was based on essentially a combat art or a martial art. And it worked in kind of a cycle or system. And every person would have a stat between 1 and 100. And they would roll a percentile die, add those two together, and compare, just like we did in Sega System. But in this case, if you had the suit that was, or the thing which beat the other thing, then you could roll 2 dice instead of 1. And so there was a specific advantage to trying to develop the right skills to be able to combat the widest possible range of characters given the stats that you're on your sheet. And this worked quite well, but it had inherent limitations. It could only grow so far. And characters basically at around level 30 would fall apart. So the numbers would become too big. And so everybody who's carrying hundreds would basically, win all the time. So we played this for only about a year. And then I went off to college. And when I went to college, I set aside my homebrew. I stopped playing. And it's partly because the crew, the party that I've been playing with was gone. I moved far away. The other was that college is an all-consuming thing, and it took all of my time. So I basically, I kind of gave up on the idea that I was developing this thing. And then as I'm going through and I'm doing my animation schoolwork and I'm learning how to draw, my sketchbooks keep revisiting the setting and these characters, and I keep kind of producing content that ties back into Spectre. And so over time, my recollections, my love of this became a new kind of muse. And I became absorbed with the idea that it should develop into an animated program. And so I began doing things like character turnarounds and effects designs. And before long, I was going so far as to produce line tests of animation that tied into specific events that we had covered. And this became kind of the focus. Of course, the reality of the animation industry and of entertainment in general is that unless you have an established property, you just don't have a shot at getting the kind of financing you need to make high quality animation work. And so I was running into this problem where I would either need financing or I would need better skills to be able to make this into a show. And they never came together. And I spent probably the first 10, maybe 12 years of my career trying to make this happen. And it never did. I couldn't make it materialize. So at this point, I felt like I was at the end of a road. And I had become a freelancer at this point, so I was able to move back to my hometown. And that's when a few friends got in contact with me and they said, we're hitting the 15th year anniversary of this game. We should crack open the old players module, the bad one, and try and play it. So that's exactly what we did. We got together, we tried to open it up and make characters in the old system. And guess what? It was bad. It was really, really bad. And we couldn't figure out how to play it. So in an effort to reverse engineer the system that we had built, I ended up creating Spectre 4.0. So Spectre 4.0 was a recreation of 2.0. It had a lot of the things that you would want to see, but it was more coherent. This is the first time I introduced miniatures into the play style. And we ended up with all of these really interesting things happening that honestly, even by this point, D&D 5.0 had come out. We were producing things that like D&D couldn't do, and it was partly a process of like creative discovery, but it was also partly because this design of a game was never built to produce those kinds of things. And so when we arrived and started producing these things, we just doubled down on them. We reinforced the things that we thought were different and cool and interesting. And we produced a very different kind of game. And so then I spent 5 years developing it into something that you now see here on the right, which is the current version of the Spectre animated system, the Spectre role-playing game, which is 5.0. 5.0 is the most advanced version of this game that I think I was ever going to produce. I had thought when I reached 5.0 that this would be the end of the line, but I should have looked backward and realized that that's never going to happen. There was so much more that I wanted to do with this. And so in playing 5.0 now for several years, I have come to picture a kind of aspirational version of this game. I know what works about it. I know what's special about it. And there are things that I can do to make the game better. For instance, we are very miniature oriented. We play on the table a lot. But the way that the system works is it's based on just a handful of stats, and the progression is 1 to 100 levels, just like it was back in the original game. I've come to realize that in fanning out the progression and breaking down the idea that there are 4 tracks, that you create so much more opportunity. And with the system that we have in place and with the amount of roles and powers that we have, and you can see like there's a lot of powers here, we have so many different ways we could take it. That characters don't need to go all the way to level 100 to be able to absorb 25 different powers, half of which you won't end up using at the end of the game. So why not just make it possible for players to get access at any point? In addition, creating items and weapons, I want to be able to craft. I also want this ability in game to be able to realize, I don't want the session to be the point where the game ends. Like, deck builders do this really well. I play Magic the Gathering, And I've always enjoyed that you go and you play with your Magic the Gathering deck, and then you go home and you deck build. And the act of building the deck is what happens between sessions. That doesn't happen in tabletop role-playing games. And I always wanted the ability to kind of tinker with and play with my character. And I think most other players have this experience, because how many players do you know go home and then create new characters they'll never play? I think one of my friends has probably rolled up at least 2 or 3 dozen characters in between sessions. And they're all characters that just end up sitting on a pile somewhere, because they're not characters he wants to invest his time into, but they're explorations of different ways to piece things together. So it's something to do in between sessions. And I was wondering if there was a way to change my game so that I could facilitate that without at the same time causing hell for the GM. In that every time they come back, the game has been destabilized by the activity of players in between. And I think I've come up with some interesting ideas. So I'm just going to create a series of videos that describe the role-playing game I've built and the ways I want it to change. I'll go over the game design document for what the aspirational view of the next game is going to be, of what Colonial Born 1.0 will be. And then I will go through and talk about how my game is played, so that you can understand kind of like the baseline of what I'm evolving out of. And then, starting in just a few days, I'm going to start with Developer Diary number 1, and we're going to dive into the process of making that game. So if that interests you, stick around. If it doesn't, then that's fine too. This is as much for me as it is for all of you. So buckle up.